Now, some harpsichords, certainly the nicer harpsichords, would come equipped with more than one manual, in other words, more than one keyboard. And whichever colors you wanted to get from the harpsichord, you could set one keyboard to one kind of sound and the other keyboard to another kind of sound. For example, one could be using coupling and maybe the other one wasn't, or one could use a harder quill and the other one would be with a softer quill. And then by switching from one manual to another, you can make sudden changes of color. Maybe not as dramatic as what we imagine being able to do on the piano, but still a definite difference from one color to another. Or you could, for example, have the left hand play on one manual and the right hand play on another manual, so that the two voices would have a somewhat different sound, a different sound quality, or a different color. Now, next we're going to watch an example where this performer takes advantage of that by having the two manuals set to two very different colors. And you'll hear that her right hand and her left hand really sound quite different from each other. Also, she is using something that some harpsichords had, this one particular tool, which was called the lute stop. And what that stop would do, I believe it places a piece of felt over the strings, or something like that, but it makes a very different sound, something like the sound of a lute. And that lute stop is what she's going to set one manual to, and will play with her left hand. In her right hand, she'll be playing the other manual, which has more of what you might think of as the normal harpsichord sound. You'll notice that now she is not using the coupling, and therefore the sound is relatively quiet in the right hand. But here's another example of how, yes, you can make different colors on the harpsichord. Now I have just one more clip for you to listen to of the harpsichord, which uses actually all of the things we've talked about so far. Coupling, different manuals, uses passages where it does not use coupling, and near the end of this clip, if you keep listening through the whole thing, you will hear the use of the lute stop. This is the last movement of Bach's Italian concerto, played by the famous harpsichordist Wanda Landowska. Next, I want to spend a few moments to talk about the clavichord. The clavichord is an instrument that you probably are less familiar with than the harpsichord. The clavichord is a smaller instrument, and some people say that Bach, for example, preferred the clavichord to the harpsichord. One thing I should mention is that for public performance, the harpsichord was the instrument of choice. It had more power, it had just more sound. The clavichord was the kind of instrument that a person might have in their home. It didn't have a big sound, it wouldn't project through really any large-sized room. It was more for playing for yourself or perhaps for a small gathering of your family and friends. But one advantage of the clavichord is that, unlike the harpsichord, you can make little crescendos and diminuendos. That is, of course, the one thing in particular that we miss on the harpsichord. Everything basically has to be played without that kind of inflection. On the clavichord, you'll hear in a clip that I'll have you listen to in just a moment, indeed can make subtle gradations of crescendo and diminuendo. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we play Bach or Scarlatti or other Baroque composers on the piano. It was not at all impossible to play crescendo and diminuendo in those days. It just was impossible to do it on the harpsichord. So the clavichord works in a way that's not terribly different from the piano. There is still the same mechanisms. You press on the key, and at the other end of the key, touching the string, is something called a tangent. And when you press on that harder, it makes a louder sound. When you press on the key softer, it makes a softer sound. It is not that different from the way a piano works. It doesn't have what we have on the modern piano called an escapement, and for that reason, the clavichord could not really sustain the sound for a long time. That's a subject for another day. But just want to let you know that that's basically the way that the clavichord works. So first, just listen to this clip and notice how you can play nice, beautiful gradations of crescendo and diminuendo.